Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Angela, for the introduction. We're going to dive right in. I am sure our hype music that started at the beginning got you a little excited. Also, that panel that we just left from was absolutely phenomenal. And so we want to keep that same good vibe, good energy in this session. In this session, we're going to take you all on a journey. And so we hope that you follow us as we show you kind of what we do and our approach to literacy in the early child space and with our instructional model, Every Child Ready. So I'm going to turn it over to Markeytta to give us a quick icebreaker.
All right. Hello, everybody. All right, so for our icebreaker today, thank you again for the introduction. Sorry, Angela. So for our icebreaker today, we're going to get a chance to play a children's book emoji game. So kind of stemming from our panel conversation that we had. So now we're going to get a chance to play about our children's books with emojis this time. So you're going to see emojis of children's books, and you're going to get a chance to look at the pictures, take a few seconds. You can either drop your response in the chat or feel free to pop off mute before the answer is revealed. So feel free to respond in the chat, just so that way you can keep your score. All right, you all ready? Let's go. All right, so guess that story. Respond in the chat. All right, so does anybody know what story is this? Yep, exactly. 5 Little Monkeys. Yes, you all are quick with it. All right, let's see our next one. What is this one? You all are quick. Yes. Cat in the Hat, exactly. Let's see. What about this one? I know this is my little cousin.
Brown bear, brown bear. What do you see?
Thank you. Let's see. Brown bear, brown bear. What is next? What about this one?
Where the wild things are.
Yay. Yep, where the wild things are. All right. What about this one?
Goldilocks and the Three Bears.
Goldilocks.
You are quick. Yes. And I think that panel discussion definitely got our gears turning about our childhood books. All right. I think this is our last one.
Chicka chicka boom boom.
Chicka boom boom.
Exactly. Well, thank you for that. Thank you all for participating in that icebreaker. So I hope that it really took you back to a time where literacy came alive for you in your childhood. I know for me that Chicka Chicka Boom Boom is one of my favorite books, and I love reading it with my son. So here's a quote I want you all to keep from Marie Lu, and it says, "You are never alone when lost in the magic of a book." So let's go ahead and connect some dots today during our session, and I hope you all keep that with you. So I'll toss it back to Lauren to get us started.
So at AppleTree, with our instructional model, Every Child Ready, we have what we call our guiding principles. And our guiding principles essentially are the dispositions or habits that we have when thinking about what we're creating for students and what type of environment that we're trying to foster, as well as what type of instruction we want to see in our classrooms. And so we have this wheel, but the two sessions that are the two principles that we're going to focus on today in this session are balanced, because we believe that having a balanced approach to supporting children across all of the domains, whether it be social, emotional, physical, cognitive, and academic development, is important. And then we also believe that in early learning classrooms, that children learn the best through purposeful play. So we believe that all things should be playful. It should have that element of fun and joy. And hopefully you all will feel the same thing in today's session. Markeytta?
So those are our two highlighted areas. So we have playful and balanced. All right, so here are our objectives for today. So our objectives, we're going to develop a shared understanding of the role that narrative comprehension plays in literacy instruction in Every Child Ready. And then we're going to get a chance to plan some book-based and literacy-rich centers activities. And then at the end, we'll get a chance to analyze some mock data on narrative comprehension and plan some differentiated small groups.
So let's take a beat. Let's think about this question. How do children learn to read? Markeytta is going to drop a Jamboard, a link to our Jamboard in the chat. If you have never used am I having weird feedback? I can't tell. No, I'm good. I'm okay.
Yep.
Okay. Because I got like a weird feedback. But thank you. So Markeytta has dropped the link. And so what you're going to do is you're going to make a sticky. And you're just going to write your thoughts. How do children, or how do you believe children learn to read? And we'll share out a few responses. So we'll give you about 2-3 minutes to think about it and then jot. And then if you'd like to, you can come off of mute and share. And if you can't access the Jamboard, you can also drop it in the chat and we'll try to transfer those over for you too, so your thoughts are reflected. So I saw exposure to books. I saw watching others model for them, consistent practice over time. Yes. Interacting with books, making books come to life, acting out stories, using illustrations, developing a love for reading. Yep. Using the pictures and saying everything they see. Yep. All of these are coming through. Yes, engaging in print-rich learning environments. Conversation. Okay. While other folks are dropping things on the Jamboard, is there anybody who wants to verbally process? I know sometimes when you're in these sessions, you don't necessarily get the chance to reflect depending on how you like to process. So sometimes some people are typers or like to write things. Other folks like to process by talking. So if there's anybody who wants to share their thoughts, by all means, you can do so now.
I guess I'll go ahead and share my thoughts because I honestly don't know. And I feel as though I'm the only person who feels as though they don't know. And although I am highly educated, master's degree and all, so of course I can read and write well, I can't even tell you how I learned to read because I don't remember because I've been doing it for so long. And I just know that my children learn how to read because I read to them a lot when they were kids. So that's the only thing I know. So it's like, well, how do children really learn to read? Because there's so many people who don't know how to read. So that when you said it, I'm actually like, well, I really don't know the answers to that. All I know is by habit, by being repetitive. That's it. Outside of that, I have no idea how children learn to read.
Thank you for sharing. I think in the panel, that was one of the things that I believe his name is Andrew mentioned, just about folks may learn how to read, but may not understand the science behind the teaching of reading. So hopefully you'll get some gems or some good advice or some tips and tricks through this session. Thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing. Is there anyone else who wants to share?
I'm sorry, I did have a follow-up to that. I just wanted to say thank you for allowing me to share that. And also, my oldest son, he's very good at reading, but he's terrible at reading comprehension. So like I said, we've been very repetitive. So he can read, he's outstanding. He can definitely read and he's on level for reading, but whether or not he understands what he's reading is the issue. So that's what I'm basically here to learn, how to get him on track to read better and understand what he's reading.
Okay, well, I think you're about to lay out our presentation for us. So we definitely are going to talk about that and talk about how comprehension is a big piece of reading and it supports children's development. I also see in the chat, someone talked about the Hooked on Phonics soundtrack. It worked for me. If you're an 80s or a 70s or a 90s, even a 90s kid, you remember that program. Any other thoughts, Markeytta, or anything else that I didn't mention from all of these lovely stickies that are on the Jamboard? The letter people.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I feel like you captured it, but no, that Hooked on Phonics hit home for me. My mom always made me do that. We would go to the skating rink. She's like, now before you do your Hooked on Phonics. So like, it was a part of my routine, like that habit for sure. So.
Yes, yes, yes. So thank you all for sharing. Just as a note, we believe that reading is multifaceted, and it's a process that involves what you were talking about, Ms. Andrews, about word recognition, but also comprehension, fluency, and motivation. And I think some of the behaviors that were put on that Jamboard definitely speak to that. In teaching reading to young children, we also believe that it's important to take a multifaceted approach that supports each of those processes. So that goes back to our guiding principle of being balanced. And so this supports the development of the whole child. So to ground us even further, let's talk a little bit about reading, right? So there are 5 components. Back in 2000, the National Literacy Panel, they developed what they called the Big 5, and those are the 5 components of reading. If you are not aware of what they are, I'm going to share them with you. They are phonemic awareness, phonics, hooked on phonics, remember that, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. And in early reading instruction, it's important to emphasize all of those components. So back to that piece about being balanced. According to the National Literacy Panel, which was a bunch of like really smart people that got together and figured out like what's the science or what's the sweet spot to reading, they were quoted as saying that a successful reading program should include both the phonics and the reading comprehension, right? And one without the other could delay or impede the success of learning how to read. So phonics should never become the overriding component in any reading program. It should also be coupled with that comprehension piece. What's more, they also stated that comprehension should be emphasized from the very beginning, right? So a kid should master both hand in hand. And if they're missing one, then you are going to see potentially struggles as they progress. One of the things that we're going to do in this particular session is we're going to focus primarily on narrative comprehension because it is one of the harder parts to master within reading, right? We got the literacy, and in terms of reading, we can do phonics, we can learn sounds, we can do sight words, we can even blend, but if we don't understand what those words mean, then we're severely missing out, right? So a unique characteristic of our instructional model, which we call Every Child Ready, or sometimes we may refer to it as ECR, is that we focus on narrative comprehension for 3 and 4-year-olds, right? So this is a little bit unheard of, but hopefully you will take this journey with us and see kind of how we approach it. Okay, so what is narrative comprehension? I'm going to say it real simple. Narrative comprehension is the ability to construct mental representations of a narrative to make meaning. So how do you understand the words that you're taking in, right? And then do you have the ability to then process and then have like discussion or be able to even respond to like questions about what you read, right? So that's essentially what it is. And it begins before a child even learns how to do phonics or how to read, so to speak. It really focuses on like all of the narratives that they hear. So things that happen in conversation, what they see on television, unfortunately and fortunately, but what they see in movies, as well as if books are read aloud. And I think we heard about that as well, about having read alouds as kids continue to go on. So processing all of that information. Today, we're going to focus on 2 parts of narrative comprehension: story structure and narrative retell. So don't forget those 2 things. Story structure is the framework of a story that includes the character, setting, character goals, goal attempts, and solutions. So if you've been teaching for a while, the 5 story elements, that is what story structure focuses on. And then the second piece is that we're focusing on retelling stories. So how are kids making meaning of the characters' feelings, their actions, and making connections between and within the stories that they read? So why do we teach it in pre-K? Well, the whole spiel, we teach it because it's important, right? Kids have to be balanced, and they have to not only be able to call and recite words on a page, but they have to be able to understand what they're reading, right? And so in pre-readers, which we refer to as pre-K and K students, reading comprehension is just termed as narrative comprehension. It's the same thing. So in pre-K, children are typically not yet reading on their own, and so therefore they need that support. And so in narrative comprehension in pre-K, it happens during read aloud and focuses on listening, comprehension, and then vocabulary instruction. Researchers have found that narrative comprehension in early childhood predicts reading comprehension in later grades. So it's really important that we get started early, right? And experts have argued that comprehension and explicit language instruction should begin before children begin to read. So helping them to understand like knowledge of words, knowledge of the world, these are both predominant precursors to reading comprehension. So now we're going to talk about or take you on our journey. Markeytta.
Thank you, Lauren. All right, so now let's go ahead and take a literacy journey through the story Moon Bear Shadow. So this book, it is included in the Every Child Ready curriculum during a week that focuses on light and shadows. So on this journey, we're going to begin by discussing narrative comprehension strategies and read aloud. Then we're going to get a chance to plan an engaging thematic center that supports narrative comprehension. And then we're going to conclude our journey by analyzing student data to plan differentiated small groups on narrative comprehension. So let's get started. All right, so in the beginning of our journey, we just want to address this read aloud for Moon Bear Shadow. It comes from our lesson, from a lesson in unit number 10. So this book is Moon Bear Shadow by Frank Ash. So this book is read to children 3 times during week 4 in our curriculum. So multiple reads of a book, it increases children's vocabulary, their content knowledge, and conceptual understanding. So children who listen to the same book repeatedly, they are more sensitive to the structure of narrative text. That's why in our curriculum, each book is read 2 to 3 times throughout each unit for 15 to 20 minutes each time. So in a strong literacy program, read aloud lessons, they intentionally build on each other to maximize the learning. So multiple reads, they can have different purposes. So you don't always have to read the entire book during your read. So maybe you're making a connection to the theme that you're learning about. Maybe you are comparing different story structures. Maybe you are doing a picture walkthrough, even doing reader's theater, or just different purposes. But it's okay to read a story multiple times. Okay, so now let's go ahead and take a closer look at the 3 different reads of Moon Bear Shadow. So that's going to be a story that is a narrative text. So story narratives, they're typically the best option for story structure, goal understanding, and some inferential connections. So now let's go ahead and listen or read our story Moon Bear to develop an understanding of the story before we get into it.
Moon Bear Shadow, Frank Ash. One day, Bear went down to the pond with his fishing pole and a big can of worms. While he was putting a worm on his hook, he looked down and saw a big fish. "I'm going to catch that fish," thought Bear to himself. But when Bear stood up to throw his line in the water, his shadow scared the big fish away. "Go away, Shadow," cried Bear. But Bear's shadow would not go away. "Okay," said Bear. "If you won't go on your own, then I'll just have to get rid of you." And he put down his fishing pole and began to run. He ran around the pond. When he got to the other side, he kept on running. He ran through a field of flowers, jumped over the brook, and hid behind a tree. "Good," thought Bear. "Now Shadow can't find me." But Bear was wrong. When he stepped out from behind the tree, the first thing he saw was Shadow. Nearby was a cliff. Bear walked over to the cliff and looked up. I'll climb so high, Shadow won't be able to follow me, thought Bear. Bear climbed higher and higher until at last he pulled himself up to the top, huffing and puffing. He smiled with pride. Then he looked down and saw Shadow. Now Bear was very annoyed, so he went home and got a hammer and some nails to nail his shadow to the ground. He hammered and hammered and hammered, but no matter how many nails he hammered, he couldn't nail his shadow down. If I can't nail him down, thought Bear, maybe I can bury him. So he got his shovel and dug a hole. When the hole was deep and wide, he let his shadow fall into the hole. Then Bear filled the hole with dirt. When he was finished, it was almost noon. The sun was sky high, and Shadow was nowhere to be seen. At last, sighed Bear, no more Shadow. But now Bear was very tired, so he went inside and took a little nap. While he slept, time passed, and the sun once again cast shadows everywhere. When Bear got up and opened his door, he saw his shadow on the door. Not you again, exclaimed Bear, and he slammed the door, hoping to lock Shadow inside. But Shadow was too quick. Sighed Bear. How about this? If you let me catch a fish, I'll let you catch one too. Nod your head like this if it's a deal. When Bear nodded his head, Shadow nodded too. So Bear went back to the pond and once again threw his line in the water. By this time, the sun was in a different part of the sky, which made it easy for Shadow to keep his part of the deal. And when Bear caught that big fish, Shadow caught one too.
All right, thank you all for listening to the story. Okay, so in a read one of Moon Bear's Shadow, children they will learn new vocabulary words such as bury, cliff, fishing pole, and shadow. So this lesson, it will define these words using child-friendly language, like a shadow is a dark shape made when something blocks the light. So after reading the story, children will demonstrate their understanding of new vocabulary combined with what they already know to answer the questions that focus on the main character of the story. So question examples would include, who is the main character? What is he doing in the story? So the teacher will record the children's responses using a graphic organizer, such as the one you see here on your screen. So this visual, it helps children organize story information and follow character motivations and goals. So Lauren's going to drop in the chat the actual lesson that you all can look at for read one, or what a read one lesson would look like. So I'll give you all a second to look at it. Great. Thank you, Lauren. All right, so I have you all participate with me. So let's talk about the main character in the story. So the titles and the pictures on the cover, they help us know who the story is all about. So the title says Moon Bear's Shadow. So who is the main character? Feel free to drop it in the chat. Who's the main character of the story? Anybody? Thank you. There, exactly. So here will be the advanced organizer. So yes, we will put Bear up. So what does the character look like? You can continue the conversation with students. Yes, Bear. So what does he look like? He's brown, he's big, he's confused, he's soft. All of those things are different characteristics that you can describe the main character. All right, so now let's move on to a read two. So the second time we read the story, children will continue to demonstrate their understanding and knowledge of the story structure by identifying and answering questions about the main character's problem. So question examples include, what was Bear's problem in the story? Can you tell me more about Bear's problem? So here's some questions for you all again. So what was Bear's problem? What did Bear want to do? Feel free to drop your answer in the chat or pop off mute. What was Bear's problem? What did Bear want to do?
Catch a fish.
Okay, I hear catch a fish. I see in the chat, get away from the shadow, get rid of the shadow. Awesome. So let's see. Oopsie, I'm gonna click too many. All right, so yes, he couldn't catch a fish because of his shadow. So both of those answers are totally correct. So now let's see our next question. So how did Bear try to solve his problem? How did he try to get rid of his shadow? Okay, I see in the chat, bury.
Cover it up with dirt.
They tried to cover it, nail it, bury it, hide it, all of those. So here we see all of those, bury it, nail it, hide from it, run from it, all of those things. He tried to do all of those things to get away from his shadow. So what happened? Okay, wait, sorry. What happened at the end? He closed the door. So what happened at the end?
He caught a fish.
He caught a fish, thank you. And now you'll be able to see, Lauren's going to drop in the chat what a second read aloud would look like for this story. Yep, so Bear and his shadow, they caught a fish. So as a side note, pre-K 3 students, they only focus on the character and identifying the problem or the character goal. But in pre-K 4, those children will identify the attempts and solutions and casual connections. So there are different levels to it. All right, so now let's get into a read 3. So the third time we read this story, it will build on children's knowledge of the main character and story problem to support narrative retell. So in this lesson, children, they are asked to recall 2 events from the story. So the teacher will use illustrations from the book to support children as they practice retelling the story. So using the illustration, it helps children make literal connections that are related to the story structure, such as the characters or the problem. So I'm going to prompt you all. So let's retell the events of the story. So remember, when we retell a story, we tell the important parts of the story in order. So anybody want to tell me what happened first? Anything happen? Feel free to drop. Okay, getting ready to fish. Great. Went fishing. Great, great, great. So here you'll see, yeah, so Bear's shadow scared away the fish. Bear tried to bury it, nail it, hide it, run from it. So you all went from the beginning to beginning. But in general, so children might only retell one of the ways that Bear tried to get rid of his shadow or what happened in the beginning. So it is important to know that it's okay that the order may be out of order. If that makes sense, sorry. So when developing narrative retell skills, the emphasis is on simply retelling 2 things that happened in the story. So absolutely what you all typed in the chat is something that happened in the story. So with instruction and practice, children will begin to retell more events and they'll be able to put the events in order. So Lauren will drop in the chat 2 things. So first will be the Read Aloud 3 lesson and then the elements of the story poster here. Thank you, Lauren. All right, so now we're going to connect some more dots from Read Aloud to Sender. So I'm going to toss it back to Lauren.
Before we do that, are there any questions? I wanted to make sure I was going through the chat just to make sure that we weren't missing anyone's thoughts or comments. I did address something earlier in the chat. But if there's nothing further, guess we'll keep rocking and rolling. Okay. All right, so how do we connect this read aloud to centers? Centers is probably our sweet spot. It is our jam. It is the fun part of what it is that we do. Centers, you all may have some different names, so I'll try to use names that are not just germane to the instructional model, but also pretty common depending on your program or your school. So one of the centers that we have in our model or in our classrooms, we call it construction zone. You may call it that, you may call it blocks. But one of the activities that we connect to that particular read aloud is a lesson called Shadow Puppets and Stage. And so what this does is it combines science and narrative comprehension skills. So you're getting that balanced approach, you're getting that integration, and you're getting more bang for your buck, so to speak. So as children develop story knowledge, they also learn to use story structure in recounting their own stories, as Markeytta just modeled before us. Knowledge of story structure helps children recall story events and causal motivations to produce sequential stories of their own. It's a real fancy just way of saying that kids are able to make up their own stories based off of the stories that they've learned or the structures that they're familiar with. And so the thought is that producing logical narratives, it supports that narrative comprehension, right? So if a kid is able to not only process the information from the story that they heard or that they read, that they're able to create their own stories, which helps them in their understanding. So hopefully that is another gem for the parent that spoke earlier. For example, in this particular lesson, children are encouraged to create a character and event, and then create a problem and a solution for a puppet show. And in doing so, kids have the opportunity to also demonstrate the knowledge that they have about science of lights and shadows, which is what helped Bear, but then also the ability to demonstrate vocabulary, right? So they can talk about the fishing pole or burying things, or refer to any of the other key language from that particular story. So kids get to have this fun opportunity to use flashlights and puppets to tell their stories. So Markeytta is going to drop the lesson itself in this link, so you have it. But that's essentially what it is. And what we're going to do is that we're going to plan some centers together. So to give you some ideas, just to see how easy it really is to transfer what you're going over in your read aloud into your centers in your classroom. Let's drop it. I can't see. Okay, thanks, Markeytta. All right, so the center that we're going to focus on right now is library. Okay, so the library center, it's a great location to retell narratives. Why? Because there's plenty of books. So you have a lot of source material to use, to draw from in terms of getting kids the opportunity to either create their own stories or retell the ones that you've shared with them before. You can also do this using puppets. This helps to increase modalities by adding props or puppets or images to reinforce the story of Moon Bear Shadow, but also adds that element of play that we keep talking about. So in a facilitation of this particular center, it's important that you ask targeted questions to scaffold children in retelling the story. And so some of those questions may include: who was the main character? What was his problem? How did he try to solve his problem? Which were all the things that we went through before with that other poster. Centers is also an excellent opportunity to collect information. So some type of informal data about what a student is able to do, whether they have the ability to understand structure, whether they actually understand the story, or have the ability to retell the narrative that has been shared with them. In this case, it would be helpful to use like a checklist to know which children can independently identify the problem and solution of the story. This will help to inform small groups. So Markeytta is going to drop a link to a Jamboard. I'm guessing it's dropped. And what we're going to do is in this Jamboard, you're going to plan out a center to support narrative comprehension. So the center we're going to use is dramatic play. You may call it dramatic play, you may call it housekeeping, but it's the same deal where what will we do? So we're going to take the time to brainstorm some potential activities that can make the story or retelling the story of Moon Bear come to life. Okay, so the first question is, what activity is inspired by Moon Bear Shadow that should be put in dramatic play center? So for all of my creative folks, what are some activities that you think would be like a cool opportunity for a kid to act out in dramatic play? You can come off mute or you can drop it in the chat. Going fishing, right? So you can have a pond set up. You can have some fishing reels if you have some laying around, or you can construct them out of just about anything. Thank you for that. What else could we do?
You could do like a felt board, like story, have the students recreate the story on felt board.
Yes, definitely. Puppets. What else could you do? What other activities could you potentially incorporate into a dramatic play center to bring Moon Bear Shadow to life? Someone said cooking. What about bears? You got to have bears, right? Like a bear costume, or you could have a big bear. You know, sometimes we may get those Valentine's Day bears that just take up space in your house. You could incorporate that very easily. Yes, you could dress up as Moon Bear, or you could be the shadow. Who knows, right? You can go crazy in your center and make it really interactive and still get kids to be able to retell the story. Pretending to be the bear, yep. Any other materials that might be creative or interesting for students to use?
You can create your own shadow on the wall for the students too, so the students can have like a shadow on the wall.
Yes, you can have a shadow on the wall. You can have a whole space where kids can project their shadows onto the wall, just like the previous lesson was talking about in construction zone, where they get to tell their story. Flashlights galore. You can use the ring lights. Like I said, you can go crazy. All right, so let's think about some of the questions that we might ask kids in that particular center to get them to tell us more about the story. So what are some of those question prompts or stems that you would use to engage a student, a child, I should say? You can come off mute or you can drop it in the chat. We can make this interactive. So a question might be, who is the main character in the story, right? That's a real easy way for you to check off if you have like a little clipboard and you just want to do a simple comprehension check for your students. What are some other questions that you might potentially ask a kid to engage them in dramatic play about Moon Bear Shadow? I know there's someone out there. Where do you think the story happened? Yes, so thank you, Ms. Camacho, or Mr. Camacho, about the setting of the story. Yes, ask them about the setting. What other things might you ask them about in this, in regards to them being able to tell you more about the story?
You can ask them about character empathy, how the bear felt throughout the story.
Yes, yes. And then you get that SEL piece in, because you can talk about emotions and motivation. Thank you so much for whoever shared that. What else? What other questions might you ask? What was the problem or the conflict in the story? Yes.
You could ask, I'm sorry. You can ask them at the, to try to like do a story extension. At the end, you can ask them, I'm trying to think of a question real quick off the top of my head, but like at the end, you can have students like extend the story.
Yes, you can. Like, what if Bear didn't have the problem with his shadow?
Yes.
Maybe it's what would be the new title of the story if he didn't have the problem with his shadow? Or what's another problem Bear might have, right? After he's fixed the problem with the story, with the shadow. Yes, maybe you ask them about the plot. You can ask them about the end. These are all a bunch of different questions that you can ask to understand whether or not a kid understands the story. Now let's talk data collection, right? Because that's the last piece. You got to make it work for you. What are some things that you could collect, or what types of information would you want to gather about any kid's ability to understand the story?
If they're able to retell key points, key details from the story.
Yes, thank you, Kathy. Yes, if they can tell key details. I think Markeytta said the goal was 2 events from the story. So maybe you have a checklist that checks off whether or not they're able to tell 2. Sequence of the events. Yes, now sequence gets a bit more sophisticated, right? And talking about order. And at 3 and 4, we just wanted to see if they're able to retell the story. But if you have kids that are ready to put them in sequential order, by all means, go for it, right? I think Nira mentioned earlier that she has story lab cards, or I've seen everything from teachers like blow up illustrations from the story and put them on the floor and have a kid put them in order and hop from, picture to picture. So there's so many other ways that you can engage a child around this story, but also be able to collect some informal data. Yes, naming the character, so they're able to do that. Can they connect the text to real life experiences? Yes, all of those things that we love to see in the higher grades. But as you can see, you set the foundation here in pre-K. Story lab cards. Okay, so if we have time, Nira, I'm going to circle back with you about explaining the story lab cards. Is that cool?
Yes, and it's pronounced Naira, Lauren.
Naira. Okay, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
No, thank you so much for correcting me.
You're welcome.
So Naira. Okay, so where are we going next? So I think I'm turning it back over to Markeytta. Am I done? Yes.
Good. You came? Okay, good. All right. So thank you, Lauren, for that. That was a great conversation. All right. So now let's conclude our literacy journey with Moon Bear Shadow, and let's go ahead and plan some differentiated small group lessons. So we're going to get a chance to discuss how to use the informal or formative data that you may collect during centers to drive small group instruction that will support children's narrative comprehension. All right, so first, let's review the skills progression for story structure and narrative retell. So remember, children begin with story structure, then they build on those elements to retell stories with detail. So these skills, they read from left to right in order of difficulty. So for each skill, we expect preschool students to master the skills in blue and pre-K students to master the skills in purple. So these skills are age appropriate and they build upon one another. So you all can take a second to read them. So for story structure, it will go from here to here. And then same for narrative retell. And you'll notice some differences between the two for preschool versus pre-K.
Right. We need to take a beat for anybody to voice a process about this skills progression. So this is a skills progression, I will say, that we use in our instructional model. It is similar and is based off of the early learning standards that you may use in DC. We also have our own internal standards that we use, but they're also based off of other states as well in their formulation, because we do work with other schools outside of DC. So I do want to voice that over. And I think it gets back to, even in the narrative retell piece, someone asked about the sequencing. So as you can see, for 3-year-olds, we just need them to tell us 2 events, regardless of order, but getting to the piece about sequencing. By the time they get to be in pre-K 4, they should have the ability or gain the skill of being able to tell story events in order.
All right, thank you. All right, so in this example, I'm going to model how to use formative data for planning small group instruction. So while my children in my classroom. While children were playing with puppets in the library center, I collected some formative data on their knowledge of the story structure framework. So in my data, I noticed that 3 of my children, they were not able to identify bear as the main character or outside as a setting. So I would target differentiated instruction for these children and identify and describe main character and setting. So those 3 children would be Maya, Chidi, and Oliver. So this will be the area where I will focus my instruction for them. So also in my data, I noticed that 5 children were able to identify bear as the main character and setting as outside. However, they were not able to identify his problem in the story. So which was his shadow scared away the fish. So I would target these children with differentiated instruction here at identify problem or character goal. So that would be Jason, Andre, Terrence, Veronica, and Zoe. So also during my observations, I noticed that 4 children were able to identify the character, the setting, the problem, and the different attempts, but they were not able to identify Bear's solution to the problem. So I would target differentiated instruction for those children at identify attempts and solutions and outcomes. So those would be my students, Eleanor, Carl, Apple, and Xavier. Any questions here? No, pretty straightforward. All right. So teachers practice story structure with different types of narrative text throughout the school year. So as we plan to differentiate instruction for children based on data collected in centers, first we're going to focus on Maya, Chidi, and Oliver's group, which is identifying the main character in the story. So to scaffold these children, we can ask questions for children like, what is the name of the book? Who do you think this story is about? What does the picture show us? What does the title tell us? So then we can also use illustrations and different question prompts to support these children to identify the setting of the story. So then second, we can focus on my group that had Jason, Andre, Terrence, Veronica, and Zoe with identifying the character's goal or problems. So to scaffold these children's understanding at this level, we may say, when I look at this picture, I see a problem. What does he want? How do we know that? Notice the picture. All right, and then the last one, we're going to focus on Eleanor, Carl, Apple, and Xavier's group on identifying the different attempts and outcomes. So here would be the question. So we would say something like, what happened in the story? How did he solve the problem? So after children have mastered identifying the elements of story structure, they can begin practicing how to retell those stories in small group. So in observing children in a library, you notice that some more students in your classroom like Taraji, Yolanda, Quincy, Deshaun, and Peter, they can consistently retell one event in the story, which targets them here and retell 2 events from a narrative text. So here would be the students we would focus on that skill. Whereas we have Greg, Inez, Rocky, Hal, and Kiana, they can retell 2 events from the story, which will target them at retell 3 or more events in sequence. So this is where I will start these students. All right, so now we're going to get a chance to use narrative retell, formative data, and apply what we've learned about narrative comprehension and retell. And retell to plan differentiated small group activities based on student data. So I think we have about 10 minutes left, so maybe we can do this part together. Yes, okay. So we are going to stay together and we can talk through how to plan a small group for retelling 3 events and then retelling story elements. All right, so I'll go back to the Jamboard. Lauren, can you drop the chat for the Jamboard? Thank you. And it's just the next page over. So here would be the 2 areas we'll be focusing on, and here are our students. So we have Taraji, Yolanda, Quincy, Deshaun, and Peter. So what type of activities will support children in retelling 3 events? So in retelling the story and in the story elements. So first, let's focus here. What type of activities could we do with these children to retell 3 events? And feel free to pop off mute or drop it in the chat.
You could have students like rearrange pictures of like the 3 main events in the story. So like beginning, middle, and end. That's also something that I would normally put in my library center whenever we have that objective as well.
Yes, thank you for sharing. Right.
Hey y'all.
Anything else? Another activity, another idea. I know you all are brimming with them or have done them. So feel free to share. Like, this is the space where all of us as learners, as practitioners, get new ideas. Y'all know how it is. No, we remix all the time. So feel free. I see in the chat peer-to-peer talk. Okay. Can you tell us a little bit more about?
Yes, you can ask a question and have them two to discuss it among themselves. Like pair the students up together.
Yes, I can see that. Come on, class language. We got readers theater. Turn
Yes,
and talk.
turn and talk is another term. Use turn and converse, turn and talk, or
to me.
peer-to-peer talk. Yeah.
All right, these are some great activities. So what about the materials? What kind of materials we prepare for this activity? So I heard, I'm gonna say her name wrong, Ms. Doye, did I say it right? Okay, yeah. So Ms. Doye said she would print out the pictures and kind of put them in order. So what other materials could we use?
You could use chart paper.
And what would you do with the chart paper?
I could have, you could first put the beginning, the middle, and the end, and have pictures up there. So that also gives them the pictorial to match the words, to let them know the beginning, the middle, and the end. And then you can write down what they're saying.
Great.
You can also have them try and, I know what we do is have kids draw pictures of, and have them put it in order, like sequence, but they will actually draw the pictures themselves.
Thank you, Naira. Markeytta, your chat is lighting up, so you might want to.
I can't see
some of those. Okay, well, I got you.
You got it.
Okay, so one of the things I see in here is that you could have a large piece of construction paper or poster board, label each part 1, 2, and 3, and have the friends draw different parts of the story. Thank you, Ms. Rush. And it could be posted in the classroom, so like it could become an anchor chart. I also see props or costumes. You can you can continue to have students draw, they can journal or dictate to teachers, have copies of the actual books. You can have them act it out with toys or bodies. Yes, to get all of those modalities in the mix. Can we hit retell story elements? Because I want to make sure.
I know, right? We got a few minutes. Okay, thank you. All right, so for retell story elements, let's just start with questioning. What kind of questions would we ask to scaffold children for supporting children's understanding of story elements? What kind of questions could we ask them?
You could show the picture and ask the child, do you remember what happened in the picture? What happened here? And you can do that with a few pictures within the book.
Yes, what happened? I see in the chat, where did the story take place? Any others?
Yep.
Give it a beat. Any other questions? No, there's nothing else going in the chat.
Okay, gotcha. All right, and then we can close with activities, because I really like the way we threw out a lot of activities. So just retelling story elements. Any other ideas for activities that we could do? Maybe not. Yep. So
acting it out.
Who are the main characters? Some more questions. Yep.
Remember the problem, the motivation. Someone else, I think earlier, talked about like extension. So what other elements can they talk about? Like, how does this solve Bear's problem? Or what's another way he could have solved this problem? Are all good questions to ask. Okay.
Well, thank you all so much for your collaboration on these two. And I hope you all took some gems from one another because those were some great ideas that you all had. So we got a chance to plan out two different differentiated literacy rich small group activities. So one for retelling 3 events and then also story elements. So those are both important areas of narrative comprehension.
Okay, so let's wrap it up. Let's just think about, or let's talk about what we did. So first, we developed that shared understanding of the role of narrative comprehension and how it plays in literacy instruction, and specifically in our instructional model, Every Child Ready. We also planned some book-based and literacy-rich center activities. And then finally, we got to analyze some mock data and to create some differentiated small groups. I want to thank all of you all for being active participants. It makes things go so much easier. Also thank my co-presenter, Markeytta, for sharing and dropping the links. Also, shout outs to Annette and Angela for holding us down in terms of the tech with Zoom. How do we grade them? So how do you award letter grades? There's a question on the floor. Markeytta, do you want to address that since we have about 4 minutes? How will we grade them, so to speak? You're on mute.
Got you. Thank you. All right. So how do we grade them? Do you award letter grades? So for the most part, for narrative comprehension, we have 2 different ways. So this one, we were talking more so about informal, but then also you can have formal data. So formal instruction or data. I'm sorry, Lauren.
So I think like in terms of giving you like a practical answer, Ms. Camacho, I would say like you could look at the progression and assign like a numerical or a letter order to the progression. And just like when you're explaining to a parent on a report card, explain like where they are in the progression. We try not to give like letter number grades in our particular context, just because professionally, that's just not what we do culture-wise. However, you can do that in your own school system. I see that the time is running, so I'm going to say, if you have any other questions, by all means, feel free to email us. I think Markeytta is going to drop our email addresses in the chat. We also have some other resources. If you go to everychildready.org, we have free books. And then we also have a narrative comprehension course that breaks down, that gives you a bit more and is a deeper dive into this particular topic. So I want to thank you all for your time, and you all have a good afternoon.
Thank y'all. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.